Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing Sleeping in Traffic Part 2 by the band Beardfish.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
So hopefully you like my outfit today. I don't usually dress up like this, but yeah, I'm like this and I'm supposed to be Misty from Pokemon. I had the wig on, but it started to itch, so I took it off and now I have these cool little braids on my sides. But yeah, without further ado, let's get right into my favorite bits from this album.
Will harm me, but I know they know I'm here. I wanna touch, I wanna feel, I wanna know exactly what's on your mind. Shimmering, bling-a-ling, glimmering. With Amanda last night.
A man? Duh.
So today we're looking at Beardfish. Now Beardfish are a Swedish prog band and they formed back in 2001 and they actually disbanded in 2016. Hopefully they'll come back because honestly they make excellent music. But the thing with Swedish prog bands is really odd. I find that there's two subcategories for Swedish prog bands. One being the subcategory of the metal bands. There's a lot of them in Sweden, like they really like their, very heavy metal music over there in Scandinavia. And then you have those other bands which actually, feature a more upbeat, light and happy tone of music. So let's take for example the band Moon Safari, which does, this really cheerful type of music. And then you have a band like Burst, which has this really dark metal kind of music that we've actually listened to on the 4th episode of this series. And when it comes to Beardfish, they actually fall under the upbeat, very happy category, which is also the category that I personally connect to the most. Now, using the word connect as something that I feel about this album would be a huge understatement because I don't just connect to this album, I love this album. So what is the music of Beardfish like? Well, I think from this album alone, what you really feel from it is the great sense of musicianship and the overall way that they make music, also laden with a ton of humor. I think the real star of the show honestly on here is the vocalist and also I think is like the keyboardist on here, which is Rickard Solblom. I think that's how you say his name. He is just a master of what he does with the singing. He usually like zigzags between two modes. He has this mode of like very Zappa-esque slash, Peter Gabriel from early Genesis type of characteristics that he does with his voice. He makes these really absurd characters that he's playing and he sings with them and it's really cool. But on the other hand, he can really go and stay low and feature like the singing you'd mostly expect to find on most neo-prog albums, which is also kind of good but it's not overwhelming. So in order to actually get into this album, we firstly have to understand the concept that comes behind it. Now, if you're a keen viewer and you've actually been listening now, you've noticed that the name of this album is Sleeping in Traffic Part 2, which presumably means there's a Part 1. And there's actually a Part 1, but I've never actually listened to it, and I want to listen to it, but unfortunately I was recommended this part, which is the second one. Now, the concept of both of these parts is to describe the human daily cycle from, going from the start of the day to the end of it and everything that goes in between in this cycle. Now, this, as it is a part 2, basically symbolizes the nighttime. So this album starts off with a very symbolic track of As the Sun Sets, which is basically a really short track which has this really odd and cool instrumentation that shows us that daytime has passed and now we're getting into night. And seemingly we just move on to the next track, which coincidentally is called Into the Night. And when it comes to actually being progressive, I think this track is the one that excels it the most. I love it so much. It's everything that I love about prog music. It's why I fell in love with this genre in the first place. This song is absolutely perfect. I love it so much. Like, I honestly couldn't even get it out of my head after listening to it. I had to replay it a few times, and I did it because I liked it, not because it was stuck in my head and it was annoying. I actually really wanted to listen to it, but I had to do other things. I had to listen to more albums, I had to do some work, and I couldn't listen to it, but I really wanted to. So Into the Night is basically the track where we realize how good Richard Soblum is on the keyboard. So as well as the singing, he also plays the keyboards, and here specifically I think he plays the Hammond organ. I'm not entirely sure, but if it does, it really sounds like it, and it does it so exquisitely well, and I love it so much. And as this song progresses, we are introduced to the entire ensemble of the 4-member band, and everyone is doing their part so good. Everyone's so creative, and there's a lot of multi-instrumentalists on here, and they're all so good. And this track honestly became so freaking amazing that by the end of it, I was writing down to myself in my notes that there's no way there could be a better track on this album. And I might have been wrong. And without hesitation, we move from Into the Night into the track The Hunter. So this one is the most popular one on Spotify, and in my opinion this song is perfect, but somehow not as perfect as the last one. So it's kind of odd. Like perfection has certain levels of perfection in some way. I don't know how this works, but I was amazed at how this track and the last track could easily show us the grandiose that made 70s prog music so good, and somehow Beardfish has just been able to recreate this sound in this album, and I was amazed by it. And this made me think, usually we think of newer prog bands making their music basically trying to recreate what was done so well back in the 70s and the late 60s, early 70s. And it's all good and all, but in theory there could come a band which takes inspiration and learns from everything that was good in the past and utilizes all of what they've learned in order to create music which is not even as good as the greatest of the past, but even better. Now, I'm not saying that what Beardfish does on Sleeping in Traffic Part 2 is that, but when it comes to being close to that, I think it's really the album to choose. And by the way, if any of you for 1 second even thought that this was going to sound like any neo-prog band out there because it just came out in this certain time frame of the 2000s, then no. This album easily could have been one of the catalogs from the 70s, from the golden age of prog. Now, moving on to the next track, which I was so anxiously waiting to talk about. This is the 4th track, titled South of the Border. Now, this one I believe shines mostly in the aspect of humor, and this is also the contender for my favorite song on here. So although the music on here is great, might not be the proggiest music of all, but it's really good. The humor, as I said, is the shining aspect of this one. Now, the story of it, and you should totally go and listen to it. I've listened to it at least 10 times by now, and I've listened to this album for the first time 2 days ago, so it tells you a lot. But the story of it is basically there's this man, and he's this really chauvinist type of guy that goes out to bars and gets high and always harasses women in his very overly masculine way. And then his co-workers, they have their yearly party and they decide to prank him, and they invite some drag drag queens over, and he gets really drunk and high, and he goes ahead and he sleeps with one of the drag queens, which is obviously a man. And then he wakes up next morning realizing that he actually slept with a man and starting to doubt himself whether his persona was actually trying to hide something, and he realizes that he's gay. And this track is just put forth in the most humorous, comedic, funny way ever. I loved it so much. Like, the first few times I've listened to it, I didn't even listen to it for the music. I was listening to it more for the story and just having a good laugh at it. But now I'm listening to this track thinking that, oh my god, it's so funny, so good musically, like every single second on it, and it's not a short track, is just fantastic. And this one might be my favorite. Now, in the script, this is the point where I just wrote to myself, you know what, past me doesn't know which song is better, so you have to make the decision right now. Now, the thing is, I really am anxious about making the decision which song is my favorite, but you know what? I'm gonna choose South of the Border as my favorite. I don't know why. I'm gonna choose it. And you know, I have a playlist of my favorite songs. I just choose one favorite song from each album every day and I put it on a playlist. And honestly, if I could, I would have put them both, like both Into the Night and South of the Border on this playlist, but I can't. So I'm gonna choose that one, but I think I'm gonna save Into the Night in another playlist because I don't want to forget about this masterful song as well. So now we move on to the next track, which is an instrumental, and it's called Cash Flow. Now, it's a fantastic instrumental, very unlike everything I've ever heard, and it's really needed in some way because the last couple of tracks were so, you know, bombastic in nature that an instrumental is what is really required on here. After that, we get the track of the Downward Spiral / Kimei. Now, that track specifically, I can talk about it extensively, but honestly, I just want to get to the Monolith, which is the title track, so I'm just gonna say it. It's a pretty perfect track. Let's move on to the big one. So now we arrive at the Monolith, the huge title track of Sleeping in Traffic. Now this baby, it holds at almost 36 minutes of runtime, so it's really long. I think it's the second longest song we've had on this list so far. Now this one, beyond everything, kind of feels like proto-prog to me. Now proto-prog, of course, being a progressive music that was made before progressive music was actually defined as progressive, so it really does feel like that because it goes all over the place. It's really experimental in nature and it takes a lot of inspiration from so many other different genres. Now this track specifically held a huge influence on what I think about this album. You see, it's not my favorite track from here, but it is really crucial in deciding whether this album is a 9 or the all glorious 10, because honestly this track alone is about halftime of the runtime of this album. And considering this, if this track was not going to be perfect, then this could not be a perfect album. So I gave it a listen. I actually started listening to it when I started writing this script, and by this point right now the track wasn't even over yet. So I gave it a listen 3 times, and I think right now I can definitely say that although it's a long track and it's not something I would just nonchalantly go ahead and listen to, I can confidently say this track is almost perfect, thus making this album a perfect album. This track has so many things on it, like I won't even try and start to elaborate about what it has. It has so many sections, so many inspirations. It has like a pirate part, god damn it, like who knows, this track is so long, but it's a prog masterpiece nonetheless. And then we end off this fantastic album with the, really short piece of Sunrise Again, which takes us out of the night, brings us back to the day where everything basically started, and it has like this resonating, echoey feeling for the opener track of this album, and it just ends off, it goes off into, its own journey the next day basically, and leaves us to ponder what the hell we've just been through. And yeah, this is Sleeping in Traffic Part 2. Truly a fantastic album. So the cover might be the weakest thing about this album. I'm not saying that it's a bad cover per se, but it's not that good. I think the most striking thing that it really, is off-putting by it is the color schemes that it has. And honestly, if I were browsing in a record shop and I saw this cover, the color itself would deter me enough to not give it a listen. And that's a shame because, as I said, this is a perfect album. So you already know it, when it comes to the rating of this album, this one gets a fantastic 10 out of 10. I am always so happy to give a 10 out of 10 to an album, and I'm not light with it. So that being said, I don't want to give out 10s. I'm not just thinking that everything is perfect. The contrary is actually correct. There's a lot of albums which near perfect. There's a lot of albums which are just good. There are albums which are mediocre, and there are bad albums, but there's not a lot of perfect albums like this one. And when it comes to the 3 perfect albums which I've chosen so far, being Touch and Red Queen to Griffin 3 and this album, I think this is the perfectest of all the perfect albums. And in spite of my commitment to actually explore new music this year, I can already see myself starting to really frequently listen to this album as a whole. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to something completely different. We're going to be listening to Tago Mago by the band Can. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all in a bit. Bye, guys.